Imagine giving your all to a company, showing up early, staying late, pouring your mind and energy into every project, only to be tossed out like you meant nothing. That's what happened to me. The worst part wasn't even losing my job. It was the way it happened. My boss stood there with a smirk on his face, making a spectacle out of me in front of everyone. He didn't just fire me, he humiliated me. I had spent years at Voltura Systems, putting in everything I had. I worked long nights, missed birthdays and weekends, all because I believed in what we were building. I designed a core tech module that could change the direction of the company, something I thought would finally prove my worth. Instead, the man in charge treated me like disposable waste. Victor Haldren, my boss, wasn't the kind of man who respected effort. He enjoyed breaking people down, reminding them that they were replaceable. On that day, he made sure everyone in the office knew he was the one with power. He fired me in front of the entire department, speaking louder than usual, so no one could pretend not to hear. My coworkers froze, too scared to say a word, their eyes dropping to their desks as if avoiding the sight of my humiliation could save them. Then he turned his attention to the little plant sitting on my desk, the one thing I kept to remind myself of home and peace during endless hours of pressure. My mother had given it to me before she passed, telling me that no matter how dark things get, life finds a way to grow. Victor leaned over, glanced at it, and laughed. "Take that ugly little weed with you. Suits you perfectly." His words cut deeper than the actual firing. Security showed up to escort me out, like I was some kind of criminal. I carried a cardboard box with my things while people I'd called colleagues avoided looking up. The plant sat at the top of the box, its small leaves trembling with each step I took. It was the only thing I could hold on to that didn't feel poisoned by betrayal. I walked out of Voltura's glass doors for the last time with anger boiling inside me. It wasn't just the loss of a paycheck or a career. It was the way he made sure to strip me of dignity. He wanted me small, broken, embarrassed. He wanted to laugh while I carried out the one thing that meant the most to me. At that moment, I didn't know what the future would look like. But I knew one thing for sure. His cruelty had planted something in me too. Something he would never see coming. I carried the box into my apartment and set it down on the floor. The silence felt heavy, pressing against me harder than the noise of the office ever had. I pulled out the small plant and placed it on the windowsill. Its leaves caught the faint sunlight, looking fragile yet alive. My chest tightened as I thought about what had happened only hours before. Losing the job was painful, but the real wound came from the way it happened. The stares, the smirks, the way people I once thought respected me refused to meet my eyes. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the plant like it held the answers I needed. My hands shook slightly as I replayed the moment in my head. For years, I had walked through those doors proud of what I was contributing, believing that the late nights and endless revisions meant something. To be dismissed so casually made it feel like none of it mattered. My loyalty, my sacrifices, my dedication, all erased in a single afternoon. The most painful part wasn't even Victor's voice echoing in the room. It was the silence of everyone else. People who had once asked for my advice on projects suddenly couldn't look at me. Coworkers who used to admire my work avoided any sign of connection, as if helping me in that moment might drag them down too. Their fear of him was stronger than their decency toward me. That cut deeper than I expected. I thought about the nights I stayed long after everyone left, scribbling notes, fixing designs, determined to make things perfect. I thought about the promises Victor made, how he said my work would define the future of Voltura. Every compliment, every word of encouragement now felt like a setup for the final blow. I had believed him. I trusted him. That trust was what stung the most. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone like him could sleep at night. He had power, and he enjoyed using it to make others feel small. I had been naive to think that loyalty or effort meant anything to him. In his world, people weren't seen as individuals, they were tools. And once a tool was no longer useful, it was tossed aside. The thought made my chest ache, but beneath the ache was a flicker of anger. I realized I wasn't just mourning the job. I was mourning the years I had given up for people who didn't value me. I was mourning the friendships that weren't real, the respect that disappeared the moment it was inconvenient. I looked again at the plant on the windowsill. Its leaves stretched toward the light, steady and calm, as though nothing had changed. I wanted to be like that, untouched by the cruelty of others, still growing no matter how harsh the environment. But I wasn't there yet. My heart was raw, my pride torn apart, my mind full of questions about what I would do next. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smirk, heard the nervous shuffling of feet around me, felt the weight of the box in my arms. I woke with the sunrise, exhausted but restless. The world had moved on, but I was stuck replaying the moment in my head. Something inside me whispered that this couldn't be the end of my story. I had been humiliated, yes, but humiliation wasn't the same as defeat. And though I didn't yet know what shape it would take, I felt the faint stirrings of something new, a determination that came from knowing I could not let him have the last word. I sat by the window, watching the small plants soak in the morning light. It reminded me of how much I had given up for a company that decided I was disposable. The thought pulled me into memories I had tried to ignore for too long. There were countless nights when the office lights flickered and everyone had already gone home, but I stayed. My desk was buried in sketches, prototypes, and test results. I skipped dinners with friends, brushed off invitations, and told myself I would make up for it later. Later never came. I convinced myself that building something important would be worth the price of missing out. Family gatherings were the hardest to skip. I remembered my sister's birthday last year. Everyone was there, laughing, eating, celebrating, while I sat at my workstation, trying to fix a problem in one of the models. I told myself it was just one night, that my family would understand. But when the calls came asking where I was, I could hear the disappointment in their voices. I carried that guilt, but kept working anyway. Weekends blurred into weekdays. The line between personal life and company life vanished. While others were out enjoying themselves, I was in front of glowing screens, reviewing reports, making sure every calculation was exact. I wanted to prove myself, to show that I was more than just another employee. I thought if I gave everything, they would see me as essential. Instead, I lost time I could never get back. The plant by the window pulled me back to another memory, one I cherished. My mother had given it to me before she passed away. She told me that caring for something small teaches you how to care for yourself. She said it was a reminder that even in hard times, growth was possible. I kept it on my desk all those years, letting it be my quiet comfort during the stress and noise. It had become more than decoration. It was a piece of her, a reminder that I was stronger than I believed. Now that same plant felt heavier than ever. Victor's cruel words about it stung, not because it was just a plant, but because he unknowingly mocked the one thing that still connected me to her. That plant had been with me through every sacrifice, every late night, every missed moment. It was the only thing that made those sacrifices bearable. Sitting in my apartment, I realized the betrayal was more than losing a job. It was being made to feel like none of it mattered, like my effort and my mother's gift meant nothing. Victor had taken my years of loyalty, stripped them of value, and tossed them aside. He didn't just fire me, he erased everything I thought I had built. As I touched the leaves, I felt a mix of sorrow and anger rising inside me. I thought about my mother's words, about resilience, about finding strength even when things seemed broken. If this plant could survive neglect, harsh air, and fluorescent lights, maybe I could survive this too. But survival wasn't enough. Deep inside, I knew I couldn't let what happened be the ending. Something in me wanted more, not just to move on, but to make sure the weight of those years hadn't been wasted. Weeks slipped by, each one slower than the last. I spent my days sending out resumes, rewriting cover letters, and sitting in front of my laptop waiting for replies that rarely came. The silence from companies weighed on me almost as much as the memory of how I had been pushed out. I forced myself to keep going, though the rejection emails and unanswered applications chipped at my confidence little by little. One afternoon, I agreed to meet an old contact for coffee. Ethan Cole had reached out to me once before, back when I was still at Voltura. At the time, I ignored his messages. I thought loyalty mattered, that staying true to my company was the right thing to do. Now, sitting across from him at a quiet cafe, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my career by not listening then. Ethan greeted me warmly, not with pity, but with genuine curiosity about how I was holding up. He didn't bring up the way I left Voltura, and I was grateful for that. Instead, he asked about what kind of work I wanted next, what kind of role would make me feel fulfilled. His tone was casual, but I could tell he was measuring my answers carefully. During our conversation, he mentioned Solvex dynamics. His words seemed almost offhand, but they carried weight. "They're hungry right now," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "Voltura's been stumbling, and Solvex is desperate for an edge. They'd pay a fortune to anyone who can give them the upper hand." The name hit me like a spark. Solvex had always been Voltura's biggest competitor, a shadow constantly looming over every project we worked on. At Voltura, every strategy session involved finding ways to stay ahead of them. To hear that they were struggling, searching for a breakthrough, made me pause. My mind went straight to the designs I had worked on, the very core technology that Victor had dismissed. I sat quietly for a moment, letting Ethan's words settle. He didn't know what I was thinking, and I didn't reveal it right away. But deep inside, I realized I still carried something that could change the game completely. The knowledge, the blueprints, the countless hours I had poured into creating something innovative. They weren't gone just because I no longer worked at Voltura. That work was mine, and I knew it better than anyone. The thought stirred a conflict in me. On one side was the voice that had always guided me, telling me to stay loyal, to take the high road, to protect the integrity of what I built. On the other side was the sting of betrayal, the memory of humiliation, the weight of every sacrifice brushed aside like it was worthless. As Ethan finished his coffee and glanced at his watch, I felt the idea taking. Solvex was desperate, and I had exactly what they needed. For the first time since I walked out of Voltura, I felt like I held something powerful in my. Ethan left me with his card, urging me to reach out if I was ready to explore options. I tucked it into my bag, my fingers brushing against the edges of the small plant I still carried with me wherever I went. In that moment, I realized Victor had taken my job, but he hadn't taken my knowledge. That was still mine, and maybe, just maybe, it was the key to turning everything around. I sat at my desk with Ethan's card in front of me, turning it over again and again. The offer wasn't spoken directly, but it was clear. Solvex needed what I had, and I knew I could give it to them. The thought made my stomach twist. Part of me felt like it would be crossing a line, stepping into something I could never take back. But another part of me whispered that the line had already been crossed the day Victor humiliated. The designs were mine. I had poured myself into every detail, every calculation, every sketch. Yet they legally belonged to Voltura. Sharing them would mean betraying the company that once trusted me. That thought stopped me every time I picked up the phone to call Ethan. But then another question followed close behind. Why should I protect a place that had treated me with such cruelty? Why should I keep safe the very man who had mocked my mother's gift and laughed as he pushed me out the door? The image of Victor's smirk burned in my memory. His words echoed in my ears, sharp and cold. Take your pathetic little plant and get out. I had tried to bury them, but they came back in quiet moments like this, pulling me deeper into anger. He hadn't just fired me. He wanted me to feel worthless. He wanted me to walk away with nothing. I pressed my palms against the desk and closed my eyes. Every sacrifice I had made came rushing back. The birthdays missed, the late nights, the guilt I carried when I chose work over family. All of it had been thrown aside without hesitation. That was betrayal. The company had never been loyal to me, so why should I cling to loyalty toward it? The thought of danger lingered, though. If I gave Solvex my designs, what would happen if it came back to me? Could I face the consequences? Would I regret it? These questions circled me like vultures. But no matter how many times I asked them, they didn't erase the bitterness. What had Voltura left me with? No career, no respect, only shame. If there was risk, it couldn't be worse than what I had already lost. I glanced at the plant on the windowsill, its leaves reaching for the light. It was the last piece of dignity I had carried out of that building. Victor thought mocking it would crush me, but the truth was different. Every time I looked at it, I felt the reminder that I wasn't finished. He had taken a job, not my ability, not my will to create. My fury grew with every passing day. Protecting Voltura no longer felt noble. It felt like letting them win. Victor didn't deserve the shield of my silence. He didn't deserve to profit off the work I had built while he laughed at my expense. If I gave Solvex the knowledge locked in my head, I wouldn't just be helping myself. I would be making sure Victor felt the weight of everything he had done to me. The choice no longer seemed like a question of loyalty. It felt like justice. And for the first time since leaving Voltura, I felt steady in my decision. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room at a private office Solvex reserved for sensitive discussions. The windows were covered, the walls soundproofed, and only a few key people were present. I sat at the table with a folder in front of me, my notes and sketches neatly arranged. My heart pounded, but my hand stayed steady. This was the moment I had wrestled with for weeks, and I was ready. Across from me sat Marianne Sloan, the CEO of Solvex, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm authority that filled the room without effort. Beside her were two senior engineers, both waiting for me to begin. I took a deep breath and opened my folder. I walked them through the designs piece by piece, the same concepts Victor had dismissed as overcomplicated. I explained how the core module could reduce costs, increase efficiency, and open doors to entirely new applications. Every line, every function had been refined through years of trial, error, and persistence. I knew the design inside and out, and as I spoke, the weight of my humiliation slowly turned into quiet confidence. At first, the engineers leaned in cautiously, flipping through diagrams, asking small clarifying questions. Then their tone shifted. The more I explained, the more their interest sharpened. One of them muttered that Voltura must have been blind to overlook this. Marian didn't speak much, but her expression told me everything. She was seeing the potential, and she was impressed. I kept my voice steady as I laid out the final piece, the part Victor had laughed at before shutting me down. This time, there was no laughter. The room fell into silence for a moment, and then Marianne leaned back in her chair. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, I felt truly seen for the work I had done. "This," she said slowly, "is extraordinary." The engineers nodded, adding their own praise, calling it a breakthrough. Marianne folded her hands and studied me carefully. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for. What did I want? Her words made my throat tighten. For so long, I had been treated as though what I wanted didn't matter. Now, I had the chance to decide. I told her I didn't want to hand over my work and walk away. I wanted to lead it, to see it through, to make sure it was developed the way it was meant to be. I wanted a role that gave me authority and security, something no one could strip from me as easily as Victor had. Marian listened, and then she smiled. She offered me a position at Solvex, not just as an engineer, but as the head of the very project I had created. Along with it came a generous salary and a contract designed to make me indispensable. She didn't hesitate, and neither did I. When I signed the agreement, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt not like a discarded tool, but like the person I had always been, capable, valuable, and in control of my own future. Months passed, and life at Solvex settled into a steady rhythm. I poured myself into leading the project, guiding a team that respected me and trusted my vision. Each week brought progress, and with every breakthrough, I felt the sting of my past humiliation fading. The design that once collected dust at Voltura was now alive, refined, and ready to change the industry. While we moved forward, Voltura began to stumble. At first, the news trickled in quietly, missed deadlines, small errors in production. But soon the problems grew louder. Their latest product, rushed and poorly built, failed in testing. Promises made to investors were broken. Contracts slipped through their fingers. Headlines began to circulate, questioning whether Voltura had lost its edge. I watched from a distance, never speaking publicly, never gloating. Still, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing the truth. They hadn't lost their edge. They had thrown it away when they threw me out. The very technology that could have saved them was now in my hands, and they couldn't see past their arrogance to realize it until it was too late. As Voltura faltered, Solvex rose. When we unveiled the finished product, the response was immediate. Industry leaders praised it as innovative, investors called it revolutionary, and clients who once relied on Voltura began shifting their loyalty to us. Every article, every glowing review, felt like a quiet vindication. The same design Victor had laughed at was now the crown jewel of his biggest rival. Inside Voltura, panic spread. I heard whispers through old colleagues who still worked there. The board questioned leadership. Investors demanded answers. Clients canceled contracts worth millions. And through it all, Victor scrambled to maintain control. He tried to explain away the failures, blaming markets, supply chains, anything but himself. But the truth was clear to everyone watching. Voltura had fallen behind, and Solvex had taken the lead. I imagined him sitting in his office, searching for explanations he couldn't find. He must have wondered how I, the engineer he mocked, had managed to turn the tables without ever confronting him directly. That was the part that made the justice even sweeter. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't argued, I hadn't sought revenge openly. I had simply done what I always did, worked hard, created, and believed in the value of my idea. The difference was that this time, I gave that value to people who actually respected it. Watching Voltura's decline didn't erase the pain of what happened, but it gave me a sense of closure I didn't know I needed. They had discarded me, and in doing so, they discarded the very future of their company. Solvex's rise wasn't just my success. It was proof that Victor's cruelty had blinded him. The world could see it now, even if he couldn't say it out loud. The engineer he had mocked, the one he humiliated in front of everyone, was the reason his company was crumbling. And I hadn't lifted a finger against him personally. I had simply chosen to grow where I was valued. The news came slowly at first, carried in pieces through whispers and short messages from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Voltura's stock had started to slide, and the pressure on Victor was mounting. The problems that once seemed like small setbacks had grown into disasters. Investors were furious, clients had walked away, and the board demanded answers he couldn't provide. One evening, an old colleague called me. Her voice was quiet, almost cautious, but I could hear the disbelief in her tone. She told me about the meeting that had shaken the company. The directors had cornered Victor, asking how Solvex had managed to release a product that outperformed everything Voltura had been working on. They asked why the designs he promised would change the market were nowhere to be seen. He had no explanation, only excuses that grew weaker with every sentence. For years, Victor had carried himself with arrogance. His presence filled every room, and people bent under the weight of his authority. But now, those same people who once feared him looked at him with anger and disappointment. The board no longer saw a strong leader. They saw the man responsible for driving the company into decline. The fear that had once protected him was gone, replaced by contempt. My colleague described how the meeting ended. Victor tried to argue, tried to insist he could fix things if given more time, but the decision was already made. The directors didn't trust him anymore. His failures were too public, too damaging. They forced him to step down, not quietly, not with dignity, but with the weight of disgrace heavy on his shoulders. The man who once mocked others so freely was now stripped of the power he had clung to so tightly. I sat in silence as she told me all this. I could picture the scene so clearly. The boardroom, the sharp voices, the papers on the table, Victor's face tightening as he realized he was no longer untouchable. For so long, I had lived under the shadow of that arrogance. To imagine it gone felt unreal. After the call ended, I didn't cheer. I didn't tell anyone else. Instead, I sat by the window with the plant at my side, watching the city lights flicker. Justice had come, but not because I shouted for it or chased it down. It had come naturally, the result of his own blindness and pride. Knowing he had been forced out, knowing his name now carried failure instead of fear, gave me a quiet sense of peace. I didn't need revenge that shouted. The silence was louder. The fall of Voltura's leader wasn't my doing alone. It was the consequence of choices he made, choices that revealed the truth to everyone who once believed in him. For the first time, I didn't feel small when I thought of him. He no longer stood above me. He no longer had the power to humiliate me. His downfall was complete, and I could finally move forward without the weight of his shadow. The mornings felt different now. I no longer woke up with a knot in my stomach, dreading what waited for me at the office. Instead, I felt a steady sense of calm as I prepared for the day. At Solvex, things moved quickly, but there was an energy that lifted me instead of weighing me down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. My office wasn't the largest or the most extravagant, but it was mine. The light streamed through wide windows, filling the room with warmth. On the desks at the plant I had carried out of Voltura on the worst day of my life. Back then, its leaves were limp and fragile, much like the way I felt. Now, under the same care and attention, it had grown stronger. New green leaves stretched outward, almost as if the plant itself had chosen to mirror my journey. My team often stopped by with questions or updates, but what struck me most was the way they looked at me. They listened. They valued my ideas. There was no mocking, no dismissive smirks, no feeling of being pushed aside. The respect wasn't forced, it was genuine, and it changed everything. Each project I worked on carried its own challenges, but instead of feeling like battles I fought alone, they became collaborations. I had people beside me who wanted the same goal, to build something meaningful, something that mattered. When a breakthrough came, the celebrations were shared. When difficulties appeared, solutions were sought together. It was a rhythm I had never known at Voltura. There were quiet moments too, moments when I sat in my office late in the evening, the city lights flickering outside. I would glance at the plant and think about all the sacrifices, the humiliation, the betrayal that had once defined me. The memory still stung, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it reminded me of the path that had brought me here. I realized that leaving Voltura, though painful, had opened a door I never would have walked through otherwise. If I had stayed, I might still be fighting for scraps of recognition, my efforts buried under Victor's pride. Now, I stood in a place where my work not only mattered but thrived. The plan on my desk became more than just a symbol of resilience. It became a quiet victory. It reminded me that survival wasn't just about enduring pain. It was about finding the strength to rise from it, to grow despite it. Every new leaf it sprouted felt like a small triumph, proof that both of us had found better soil. I didn't spend time thinking about Voltura anymore. Their struggles, their losses, their failures no longer belonged to me. What mattered was the work ahead, the opportunities in front of me, and the life I was finally building on my own terms. As I leaned back in my chair, watching the green leaves catch the sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The storm had passed, and in its place was a calm that allowed me to move forward freely. This was not just a new job, it was a new beginning. There were evenings when I sat alone in my office after everyone had gone home, the plant glowing softly in the corner light. It was impossible not to think about the way Victor had laughed at me, mocking something so small, so personal, as if it defined me. Back then, it had felt like cruelty for cruelty's sake. Now, when I looked at the same plant, I realized how wrong he had been. He thought it was a weakness, but it was strength in plain sight. It had survived neglect, it had grown even in darkness, and it had outlasted him, just as I had. The truth was, I hadn't planned revenge. I hadn't set out to destroy anyone, but his arrogance had given me every reason to walk away without protecting the very company I had poured years into. My choice wasn't made out of pettiness. It was born from betrayal. Why should I shield someone who had treated me like nothing? Victor handed me the push, and I simply turned that push into momentum. Solvex thrived with the technology one had carried in my mind, and I thrived with it. Every milestone we hit, every success we celebrated, became another reminder of what Victor had thrown away. He had mocked me in front of everyone, thinking it would bury me. Instead, it carved a path that lifted me higher than I ever imagined. I often wondered if he thought about me after his downfall. Did he remember the words he used? Did he think of the plant he ridiculed? I didn't need to know the answers, because the outcome was already clear. His laughter had turned into silence. His power had slipped through his hands. And I was still here, stronger, steadier, standing in a place he never believed I could reach. The sweetest part of it all wasn't watching Voltura collapse, or seeing Victor lose everything. It was the quiet knowledge that his cruelty had no power over me anymore. The very moment he believed he erased me was the moment I began again. His attempt to humiliate me had only fueled my rise. That was the revenge, not the destruction of him, but the rebuilding of me. When I touched the leaves of the plant, I remembered my mother's words about resilience. She had given it to me as a reminder that growth comes even after the hardest storm. She had been right. The plant had thrived because I cared for it, and I had thrived because I refused to let one man's cruelty define me. I didn't brag about the outcome. I didn't need to. The world saw the results for itself. Solvex moved forward. Voltura faded, and I found peace in a place where I could finally breathe. In the end, the real revenge wasn't about him at all. It was about me reclaiming what he tried to take. He thought firing me would erase me. Instead, it planted the seed of his own downfall.